As you can see, the title of this video presentation is Reality and Consciousness. We are familiar with physical reality being described in terms of particles and space. However, the particle and space view of reality does a poor job at explaining the existence of consciousness and other non-physical phenomena like awareness, minds and emotions. In this presentation, we will have a look at a different way of describing the universe, a way that seamlessly and simultaneously builds both reality and awareness into its very fabric. And we'll see how this different viewpoint explains life and consciousness, as well as the nature of our minds and our emotions. And we will also see how we relate to everything around us. Reality and Consciousness consists of 12 short, voiced-over PowerPoint presentations. It is highly recommended that you watch them in sequence, because there is a logical thread that runs through all of them from start to finish. I hope you enjoy these presentations. The contents are Introduction and the Quantum Sentience Field, Process and Interfunction, Why Sentience and Space are Inseparable, Atoms and Light, Holons, Life and Consciousness, Tools, Toolmaking and Cyborgs, Holons and Thinking, Decisions and Mental Health, Groupthink and its Dangers, Incarnate and Discarnate Centers of Consciousness, Cosmic Consciousness and Absolute Sentient Power, Spirituality and Religions, and finally, the Science and Mathematics of Reflections and Holons, and the series summary. Before we start, many thanks are extended to the creators of the illustrations used in these presentations. Illustrations are used for educational purposes and are duly attributed to their creator. A special thanks is given to Hepzibah Yohanan for permission to quote Eugene Halliday's writing, and for permission to use the cover illustrations of Eugene Halliday's book, Reflexive Self-Consciousness. This acknowledgement is to be found at the end of the other presentations in this series. So, when we start looking at reality and consciousness, we're tackling two of the most fundamental problems of philosophy, ontology and epistemology. Ontology asks questions like, how come are there things? This room, the chair you are sitting on, tiny atoms and vast galaxies? How come there are countries and corporations and societies? How come there is a universe? How come there is anything? And epistemology asks questions like, how come we are aware of the things around us? How come we are aware of ourselves? What is sentience and consciousness? What is the nature of our minds, and why do we have emotions? As we develop this new view of reality and consciousness, we need to enlist the help of some inspirational thinkers. We are particularly going to refer to the works of Eugene Halliday and Arthur Koestler. We will start with some guidance from Eugene Halliday. In his excellent book Reflexive Self-Consciousness, where he explains among other things how to live a whole and balanced life by reconnecting with our true sense of being, our consciousness, he talks about sentience. He says, there is a peculiar fact about sentience or awareness or consciousness. If we exclude it from the ultimate source of being, if we do not posit it as a property of that source from the very beginning of creation or evolution, we cannot find a point later at which we may logically introduce it. Sentience denied at the source of being cannot be later introduced into the stream flowing from it. Here he is pointing out the fundamental flaw of Western scientific logic. Particles and space are insentient. There is no way they are aware of anything. So when scientists build a universe from particles and space, they cannot in any meaningful way address life and consciousness. What else does he say about sentience? Importantly, he links sentience to feeling. He says the word expressing what is most basic in the knowing process is sense, from the Latin sentire, to feel. And he says, sentience has a less particularized use than consciousness, and therefore may be used to express that faculty within us whereby we know by feeling. By sentience we shall mean that which knows by feeling without sharply defined formal content, but which is the ground of the possibility of formally defined consciousness. He is suggesting here that sentience is based on feeling, and that consciousness may be built from sentience. We will see shortly just how important this idea is. He also says we may say that feeling is our state when we know the field of our experience. Feeling is field awareness. To feel is to know a field state. And he reminds us that a field in electronic theory is defined as the zone of influence of a force. Psychologically, we may say a field is a zone of feeling, or a place in which we feel some process, or sense something without defining precisely what form it has. In principle, a field is ultimately infinite. The field of sentience is limitless. We will find it useful to note here that Eugene Halliday uses the word process to describe what we may feel or sense around us. He is intimating here that the world around us may in some way be a process. Seeing the universe in terms of a process is very much associated with the work of Alfred North Whitehead, who in 1929 published a series of lectures called Process and Reality, where he set out his philosophy of organism. Whitehead's work on process and reality is probably one of the most difficult philosophies to understand. We, however, are going to take a much more understandable approach. So I now suggest that we have 4 words and concepts to help us develop a new view of reality and consciousness. We have sentience, field with an IE, field with a double E, and process. To help us along, we will also define sentience as having the property of self-awareness and the awareness of other. So let's start by looking at fields. In science, a field is a quantity of something that has a value everywhere within the field. Let's have a look at some examples. On geographical maps, the height of the land is shown by assigning a numerical height above sea level to each point on the map. The cartographer makes the map readable by drawing lines that join together places on the map with the same height. These are the familiar contours that we see on maps. They are very useful for illustrating how steep mountains are and what areas might get flooded. They are illustrations of a height field. There is nowhere on a contour map or the reality that it represents where there is no height. Similarly, when the weather presenter shows us a map with isobars on it, they are showing us an atmospheric pressure field, and this allows them to describe what the weather is likely to be like. And there is nowhere on this map, or the actual area that it covers, where there is no weather. It's important to remember that there are no gaps in fields. So, what are fields made from? Let's have a look at some really simple fields. We will use blue fields as examples. On the left is a flat, uniform blue field. There is only one value of blue in this field. On the right is a variable blue field. There are many different values of blue. It is obvious that the variable field is by far the most interesting. If we want to show that our fields are infinite in extent, then we can show this by adding 4 outward-facing arrows to our field diagrams. But what are fields made of? We need to understand some quantum theory. Believe it or not, you can understand all you need to know about quantum theory in 2 minutes. I am going to show you how easy it is to make a blue field using quantum theory. On the top left we have some blue quanta, represented by the small blue circles. And as we move to the right, we add together more and more blue quanta. And eventually we make the blue quantum field. Okay? Now we are aware that quantum entities are very small. So on the bottom left we have some very small quantum blues. You can think of them as so small that they only exist as a concept. But as we add together vast numbers of these quantum blues, we start to see the blue quantum field. Eventually we add enough together to make the complete blue quantum field. Quanta are very, very small. You need to add vast numbers of them together to make fields. But now, for our purposes, this is all we need to know about quantum theory, because we now know how to build fields. We can build any fields we like from quanta. Scientists love fields. They use them all the time. For example, they build electric fields, magnetic fields, energy fields, and gravity fields, to name just a few. Now there is no reason why, in exactly the same way, we can't build a sentience field by adding together sentience quanta. So, in this diagram, we are making a sentience field from sentience quanta. All we have done is change the labels in the previous diagrams from blue to sentience. That's all there is to it. Of course, we've completely begged the question. What is quantum sentience? And how could quantum sentience be related to the scientific physical fields that we just mentioned? In part 2, we will answer these questions by finding out about process and interfunction.